It's really great to be here today. And I'm going to talk about animal behavior and also about autism. I didn't speak until I was 4 years old, severely autistic kid. And if anybody's got a 3-year-old out there who's not talking, the worst thing you can do is nothing. Take this kid out to events like this. Get him out doing things. Teach him how to take turns at games. That's really important. Teach them basic skills, because I'm seeing too many of these kids getting so coddled they aren't learning anything. Yeah, I just talked to a kid this morning, needs to get a job. It's important that they get a job where family is not the boss. Somebody else is the boss. Learn how to get a job. Super important. So let's just go to my next slide. And if you want to understand any animal, I don't care if it's dog, cattle, it doesn't matter what it is. Animals do not live in a verbal world. They live in a sensory-based world, not a verbal world. You've got to get away from thinking in language. In fact, right after I'm finished talking, my new book is going to be for sale, Visual Thinking. And some of the people that are the very best with animals are autistic. Also, some of the people that are super good with mechanical things, can fix anything mechanical, are autistic. But they cannot do algebra. And I'm very concerned that these kids are getting screened out. And that's what my new book, Visual Thinking, is all about. And I want to see the kids that are different get out and be successful. I worked with people that owned big metalworking shops that were autistic. And they had 20 patents. But today, they've retired out. They're not getting replaced. The kids playing video games in the basement when they ought to be out doing things and building things. So when you look at what your dog is doing, what is it smelling? They said they opened this, but they really didn't. To make sure I don't get water on the mic, because I do believe in the separation of water and electronics. There are two things that don't work very well together. So we'll go on to the next slide. All right, here's a real mind-blowing research done at Cornell University. Dogs have smell pictures. They got a nose that's 100 times more sensitive than ours, with a direct internet connection to the visual cortex. That's really trippy. Smelling in 3D? Try to imagine that. I certainly can't do that. And when I was reading about this at a big vet convention, and I was going up the escalator, and I go, okay, I put my head down, I can smell some machinery grease in the escalator, and then I put my head up, I can smell some popcorn in the trade show. That's just a mild version of that. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting book that about animal senses, the immense world. Animal senses. Well, that's going to affect behavior. The octopus lives in a touch world. The dog's social life is totally a smell world. Animals like cattle and sheep, vision controls things that they get afraid of. Vision is the dominant sense when there's something scary. Let's go to the next slide. Now, everything I think about is a picture. And I didn't realize that other people thought in words until I was in my late 30s. That was a shock. You know, this is why the artists and the accountants hate each other's guts. It's because they think differently. But once you realize that they think differently, there's complementary skills. Because these people that were super good at building mechanical things in the shop, might have 20 patents, they're going to have to get a verbal thinker to run the business. You know, to bill the customers, order the materials, do those sort of things. Let's go to the next slide. And now, when I was young, I thought everybody thought in pictures. But when you figure out how people think differently, you can figure out how you can work together. And that's what my visual thinking book is all about. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the thing about something new things to animals are both scary and attractive. They are attractive when the animal can voluntarily approach. You can see these cattle walking up to the box. Now, I can assure you, if this box was blowing across the pens, the animals would be running away. But also notice you've got the bold animals that come right up to the box, and you got some more shy animals that don't. That's genetic differences in behavior. Some animals are going to investigate the box before some of the other animals. But something new is scary when you suddenly introduce it. I was just at a ranch in Missouri, and they told me about how they flew a kite for the first time on that ranch, and their horses freaked out and ran back to the stable. They had never seen a kite before. You know, people will say to me, well, my steer was fine at home and he went berserk at the show. You got a lot of new things there. You better get them used to those things before they go to a show. And too many animals today lead too sheltered a life, too many dogs, and they're afraid of everything. Let's go to the next slide. Sudden new things. They're scary to animals. They're also scary for individuals with autism. I'll give you a little hint. If your autistic kid's afraid of the vacuum cleaner or some other noisy thing, let the kid turn it on and off, where they turn the thing on and off. And that leaf blower might go from the thing they're most afraid of to their favorite thing to play with. If they control the loud noise. Let's go to the next slide. Too many dogs, afraid of everything. Now, dogs that are fear the veterinarian tend to be the ones that have led to sheltered a life, just scared of everything. They haven't experienced enough stuff out in the world. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this is an interesting experiment that my student Megan Corrigan did. And, horse people will say, well, why did my horse just suddenly spook and go berserk? Now, look at that play set, and look at how it looks totally different when it is rotated. When it's rotated, it looks completely different. So young fillies and colts will walk by there 15 times until they no longer stopped, no longer put their head up, and when that thing was rotated, it became a new object. See, we'd look at that and go, yeah, it's a kid's toy. That's not what animals do. They don't know it's a kid's toy. But look at how different it looks when it's rotated. And then I repeated the experiment with a big green chair, and it became something new when it was rotated. And you can find the paper online. It's something like a reaction to a complex rotated object in the American quarter horse. I don't know why the journal article reviewers wanted American quarter horse in there, but we actually have a scientific study on this. And I really like this paper because it illustrates now with science something I've been talking about for a long time. Let's go to the next slide. And then some other research done with horses. You train the horse to tolerate an umbrella, one of those spring-loaded ones that just opens like that. That doesn't transfer to tarp. That doesn't transfer to those flags that are over there on that string. Yeah, let's get them used to different flags. So a big, like, American flag or so state flag. I don't think I have to teach them every state flag. But I would have to teach them that an American flag and maybe a state flag, a big one on a pole, but also train them some of these small pennants. Because you see how that looks quite a bit different. Okay, you got an American flag over there, but you see that size of flag there looks different than the pennants. So I need to train them to both. Let's go to the next slide. Now here's just an example in a cattle handling facility where sharp shadows interfered with handling. On a cloudy day, there were no shadows. And there was worse handling. The animals would stop at the shadows. More electric prods, more people yelling at them. And when it comes to cattle handling, the first step is you got to calm down when you handle animals. Calm down. Don't scream at them. Because if you get an animal all excited, it takes 20 minutes for them to calm down. Get scared instantly, long time to calm down. Let's go to the next slide. Headed straight into the sun. It's not going to work very well. You've all been out on the highway blinded by the sun. Let's go to the next slide. Now this is a shadow I call the spider monster. You know, I get asked all the time, are cattle afraid of getting slaughtered? No, they were afraid of the spider monster. And this shadow appeared at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Wasn't there in the morning. Everything was working fine. But it showed up in the afternoon. Let's go to the next slide. Here's just an example of seeing a little red string, seeing a car through the side of the handling facility. Maybe move the vehicles away from it. Animals will show you the thing they don't like. They'll come right up and stop and look at it. It's easy to find it. You just have got to be observant. Be a good observer. But I find that I still have to keep talking about the same things, like not yelling at cattle, because people are still doing it. Let's go to the next slide. Chains hanging down. Get all the little distractions out of the facility. We'll go to the next slide. The next slide, please. Okay, this was down in Australia, so that's why the truck looks really weird. And they had 2 identical cattle handling facilities, identical design. One that worked and one with constant backing up. This one had the truck. The other was inside a building, so no truck to look at. And when I pointed it out, they go, I didn't see that. But look at that truck. It's obvious it's there. Let's go to the next slide. Turns out I got a big visual thinking circuit in my head. We'll show you another slide of that. I've got a very big visual thinking circuit, but I don't have any algebra circuit. And one of the things I'm very concerned about is kids like me who are extreme visual thinkers, object visualizers, getting screened out of school because they can't do algebra. And people that I worked with that had giant metalworking shops also could not do algebra. I'm seeing students that want to become a veterinary nurse, second and third algebra. I don't know why you need that to be a veterinary nurse. Chemistry, yes. Physics, yes. I'm not going to be going into those subjects. That's for the kids that are math heads, because autism comes in like 3 different kinds. Extreme visual thinker, who thinks in pictures. Extreme mathematician, who thinks in patterns, not pictures, but patterns. And then word thinkers, who think in words. And most people are kind of mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. We can go to the next slide. That's where a very, very bad working memory. Another thing you want to do with the kids that are different is don't give them long strings of verbal instruction. They can't remember it. Give them a pilot's checklist of the steps. A very simple accommodation. You can look pilot's checklists up online. They're very simple. And they're chunked, like pre-taxi, pre-takeoff. And you have maybe 5 to 8 things in each section of the pilot's checklist. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this is the slide on the different kinds of thinkers. And there's scientific research that shows that they really do exist. And then my new book, Visual Thinking, and we do have them for sale. We got lots of books for sale back there afterwards. And then I'll be here tomorrow with Joe Salatin. We have to leave right at noon to catch flights. But there's science that shows that different kinds of thinking actually exist. I'm an object visualizer. I can't do abstract math. Then you have a pattern thinker. You're a music and math person. Then you have verbal thinkers. Then you have people that rather do listen. I'm finding up to a third of my book sales are audiobook. A lot of people would rather listen than read. I'm the one who would rather read it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this horse was terrified of black cowboy hats because he'd been abused by somebody wearing a black cowboy hat. Now, when I put the hat on the ground, it was less scary. But then as I took the hat and I moved it closer and closer and closer to my head, it got more and more scary for the horse. You're starting to get a match of the pictures. White cowboy hat was fine. See, often fear memories can be very specific. Like we have a program at Colorado State University called the Right Horse Program, where they rehab rescued horses and sell them. And this one horse was frothing at the mouth when it had a jointed snaffle bit. Think feeling picture. And we gave that horse a one-piece solid bit. It was good. It was a new file folder. I was so happy, and the students saw that. And then I had them hold the different bits in their hands and close their eyes and see how that jointed bit, which was associated with being abused, feels different than the one-piece solid bit. It's a feeling picture. I saw lights going on in their heads as I put 2 different bits in their hands with their eyes closed, because it's a feeling picture. It worked. Oh, no more frothing at the mouth? That made my day. Now, the thing is, I can control what bit I put in the horse's mouth, but I can't get rid of every black cowboy hat. You see, and then if you get these fear memories, you can train them not to get scared of them, but they have a nasty habit of coming back, sort of like a PTSD. Let's go to the next slide. Calm animals are easier to handle. It takes 20 or 30 minutes for them to calm down once they get scared. So let's say you brought the cattle up into the corrals and they got scared, then give them time to calm down. Maybe go on a break. Let's go to the next slide. It's very important to reduce fear. A lot of veterinary clinics are doing fear-free, trying to get away from harsh methods of restraining dogs. But people are still not thinking. I went to a vet clinic with Marty Becker and watched 3 technicians force a big dog down while 4 other dogs in cages watched this. That's not good. Got to watch 3 people abuse a dog. Now, I don't think they know what a dog on the operating table is. But forcing a fully conscious dog down, yeah, they know what that is. And being afraid of the veterinarian has gotten worse. When we were kids, veterinarian would give a dog a shot. It was no big deal. But our dogs ran around loose. We did have the problem of dogs being killed by cars. But I think in a lot of ways they had a better life. They got to play with other dogs. A lot of dogs are leading way too restricted a life. Let's go to the next slide. All right, why are we forcing dogs down when you can teach a lion to do a nail trim by feeding it meatballs? I've shown this same exact set of slides at veterinary conferences, and they're really, really shocked when they see this. This is like a real eye-opener for them. So the next slide. Now, some dogs are getting so stressed out that they're turning gray prematurely. This is a study done by Camille King, a really hardworking researcher. And dogs that are impulsive, dogs that, when they're home alone, tear the house up, these are the dogs that are turning gray before they're 4 years old. And it is just stress. Let's go to the next slide. Fear is the main emotion in autism, and in a lot of situations causes a lot of behavior problems. When animals are afraid of things. Okay, let's say, did the dog bite you truly aggressive, or was he afraid? It's important to figure out the difference. Now, it turns out that my fear center is 3 times larger than normal. A lot of people with autism have horrible problems with constant fear. Any little thing, full nervous system reaction. It was terrible. I'll tell you right now, I've been on antidepressant drugs for 40 years. And I just talked to a very nice lady that I recently, who took me to the airport recently. And she was taking some antidepressants, Lexapro, and it was working really well, and she went off of it. And then it didn't work as well when she went back on it. Yeah, but this was due to a biological problem in my body. And my health was horrible. Colitis attacks that wouldn't stop. You know, unfortunately, that cleared up. But my fear center was on high alert over nothing. It was biological. And I discussed that in my book, Thinking in Pictures. Let's go to the next slide. Now, you can have high fear dogs and low fear dogs. Now, the problem in the scientific literature is people use different terms. High fear and low fear, and bold and shy mean exactly the same thing. And the bold dogs who get less scared when they went to the animal shelter were less likely to get sick. The ones that had the higher fear response, more likely to get sick. We'll go to the next slide. Do animals have emotions? Absolutely, they have emotions. Prozac works on dogs. They've got the same neurotransmitters in the brain. They definitely have emotions. But I can remember in the early 90s, I was not allowed to put the word fear in a journal article. Had to call it agitated behavior. Couldn't believe it. People who studied animal behavior denied animals emotions. Yes, they have them. Let's go to the next slide. Now, here's an interesting paper on horse domestication. There were 2 small genetic mutations that made it much easier to tame horses. They had an increase in serotonin in the brain. That's the same thing that Prozac does. So the Prozac gene. And they also had a change in genetics that reduced back pain. Think that's going to help on riding horses. And then the domestication of horses just took off. Let's go to the next slide. These are the main emotions in animals. They're also the main emotions in people. You have fear, you have anger, you have separation distress. And separation distress is a different emotion than fear. They're not the same thing. So you have the dog that's home alone tearing up the house. That's separation distress. Or one lamb off by itself, that is separation distress. That's not fear. Then seek, that's the exploration trait. Like I showed you that red cattle in the beginning. That one steer came right up to the box. It could be due to low fear, but he also might have a higher seek drive, because there's differences in cattle on how much pasture the animals are going to eat. get out and graze. Some animals get out and graze a whole lot, and others do not. So you can have differences in high or low fear, but also high or low seek or exploration. See, both environment and genetics affect behavior. And I saw that at our experiment station. We've been selecting cattle for a low temperament, and the previous speaker had talked about that. I could hear some of it, and I totally agree with him about the smaller sized cows. I heard that part of it. Lighter coat, slick coat, 900 to 1,100 pounds, not so big. Yeah, we're finding that. A lot of the cattle that are being bred today, they're too big to be out on sparse rangeland. The problem is that the steer that the meat plant wants has a big sister that you can't feed out on these ranches. The cow is just too big. We have found that in eastern Colorado. We've found it in Montana, in Missouri, in Kentucky, in a whole lot of places. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, both environment and genetics affects things. I already talked about the high and low exploration cows. We can go to the next slide. Non-slip flooring. See how that dog's in a brace position? Give it a non-slip floor. In your cattle handling facility, have non-slip flooring. I can't believe the people that are still building skating rinks at cattle handling facilities. And I got to still talk about this. I went to a brand new community college cattle handling facility within the last year. It had a hard-troweled, smooth floor. A brand new 4-H and FFA building. A smooth floor. One of my students told me about that just this last semester. And weighing their steers was horrible. People are still making this mistake of not providing a non-slip floor because animals start to panic when they start slipping. Yeah, let's give them a non-slip floor in the handling facility. People say, well, Temple just talks about the same old things, but I visited a facility with a slippery floor and got shown 2 cell phone photos of 2 other facilities where they just recently, within the last year, totally messed up on not providing non-slip flooring. Let's go to the next slide. Do animals have emotions? Gregory Burns trained dogs to go into the MRI scanner. And when they smell their favorite person, the reward circuits light up. Yep, they've got emotions. And he's got a really funny book describing how you train dogs to lay still in an MRI scanner. And he was sneaking them into the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning. But now he's got enough research money, he has his own MRI scanner, so he doesn't have to sneak them in there anymore. But it was just hilarious. 3 o'clock in the morning, they got a few technicians kind of to help them out with it. Let's go to the next slide. Do animals feel pain? Yes, they do. Definitely they do. And this is what's called a self-medication experiment. They'll drink or eat something that tastes really nasty to reduce the pain, and when the inflamed joint heals, stop eating the stuff. Let's go to the next slide. What do dogs need? One of the things that dogs need when they're in the shelter is to have a volunteer come in every day and take each dog out for a good time of play and interacting with people. Dogs need people. And the shelters that do this, you don't have anywhere near as many behavior problems. And the stress is way, way, way down. And one of my other students, Krista Coppola, has got a really nice paper about this in physiology and behavior. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is a dog park that worked. I went to veterinary conference, and this is where we had our banquet. And look at all these kids and dogs having such a great time. You know how they made it work? They had some rules. No outside food, either dog food or people food. No outside toys. They provide tennis balls. That gets rid of resource guarding. Have to really enforce those rules. They had staff that had cleaned up the dog poop instantly. And I talked to the owner, and he admitted he had to kick his own dog out of here because it was too aggressive. He said 10% of the dogs could not play here. They were just too aggressive. But it was so nice to see all the cell phones put away. Yes, cocktails are allowed. They have a shipping container that they sell cocktails. Yeah, people drinks are allowed. They found that that did not cause problems with resource guarding. But either dog food or people food did cause problems. Let's go to the next slide. Now that pressure wraps work on dogs that are home alone, they tend to have some effect on dogs that are home alone. And that idea came from a squeezing machine I developed, because remember, I had all this anxiety, and I watched cattle go into a cattle squeeze chute, and sometimes they kind of calmed down, because pressure can be calming. You know, there's some individuals where a weighted blanket might be helpful. I don't think you'd want that on a hot day like today. When the pressure wrap was put on the dog and left alone in the kennel, it spent less time looking for Camille, again, the Camille King, to come back. Let's go to the next slide. There's the squeezing machine. Now, I had problems where I couldn't tolerate people touching me, but you see, I could control the squeeze machine. See, a lot of getting the sensory problems desensitized gets back to the person being able to control it. Let's go to the next slide. There's the rear view, and that's some skilled trades I did. I built that myself. I built it all by myself. And I do have some really good kids' project books, because I'm seeing a lot of kids today, they've never made a paper airplane. They've never made a paper snowflake. They don't know how to use scissors. They're growing up in a world where they're totally removed from the world of the practical. And it makes me very concerned that these kids are going to be making policy about stuff in the future, and they don't have any idea how practical stuff works. Let's go to the next slide. Solitary mammals can provide a model for autism. Okay, in the cat family, lions are more social than panthers or leopards. There's a connection here with autism. Are panthers and leopards abnormal? There's a point where a little bit geeky and nerdy is just a personality variant. When do you put a medical label on it? I'm concerned that too many kids that are really smart are sort of just becoming their label. And that's not good. What's made life interesting for me is having an interesting career. And I want to help other kids that are different get out and get into careers that they're really, really going to like. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, we'll skip that. Let's go to the next slide. The same genes that give human beings a large brain also cause autism and schizophrenia. You see, building a big brain is a messy proposition. The main difference between people and animals is not emotions, it's the computer that sits up on top. This gigantic computer that we have. It's a messy proposition building that. A lot of stem cells multiplying really fast. Let's go to the next slide. Now, what I want to show you on this slide is when you force an animal to do something, like forcing that big dog down, or forcing cattle, you get a lot more stress compared to an animal voluntarily cooperating with things. You get cattle, used to going through the facility, you're not going to have stress. I have trained sheep to line up in a line for the privilege of getting on the tilt table to get a half a teaspoon of horse feed. You don't need very much of that tasty stuff. I don't want to get them sick. But when you force animals to do things, you're going to get a lot more stress than an animal voluntarily cooperating with you. Let's go to the next slide. Well, here's antelopes at the Denver Zoo being trained to cooperate with veterinary procedures. Nobody thought we could do this. We did it. Now, you have to habituate really carefully because they're really flighty. And one of the things we learned is the veterinarian who had shot them with a dart gun or had shoved them up against a wall with a piece of plywood could not work with our trained animals. He was the bad person. And even though these animals were trained for veterinary procedures, when the roofers came to fix the roof, they freaked out and panicked. You see, that's a different picture. People up on the roof. Animal learning is much more specific. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, stockmanship matters. One of the things I've found is people want the magic new thing more than they want the management. Okay, we build these new corrals. That's going to make everything just totally, absolutely wonderful. That doesn't fix everything. You've got to have the management to go along with the new corrals. People think, I get this new computer. That's going to fix everything. Let's go to the next slide. Make an animal's first experience, any animal, with a new person, a new place, a veterinary clinic, for example, a good first experience. A new horse trailer, training a horse to a horse trailer. Make first experiences with new things good first experiences. Because if they're bad first experiences with something new, boy, they don't forget that. Make new experiences with new things good. Like maybe the first time they come into the corrals, feed them in the corrals. That'd be a good experience. Let's go to the next slide. A horse often will be less afraid of some novel thing if he has a familiar person with them. That will tend to reduce fear responses. Owner present during the veterinary exam often will reduce fear responses. So you've got to figure out, is the dog fearful, or does the dog think he has to protect the owner against the vet? So you got to figure out the motivation. If the dog is fearful, the owner should be there. If the dog feels it has to protect the owner, then the owner should be 5 miles down the road. So you've got to look at what the motivation is. Let's go to the next slide. Animals make categories. On the leash, I protect. Off the leash, I can go play. I'm in the back of the pickup, I protect. See, they make very definite categories of when they need to protect something. Let's go to the next slide. And autistic people also make categories. And I am what's called a bottom-up thinker. Verbal thinkers will have big concepts. They'll have really big concepts. The way I create concepts is with specific examples. I can think of different specific examples where a rotated object made an animal afraid. Now, some objects like a round trash can, that looks the same, so it's not going to apply to that. But bottom up, you take specific examples and put them into categories. So how did I figure out when I was a little kid that a cat wasn't a dog? When I was really little, I sorted by size. That worked great when the dogs were golden retrievers or Labradors and an Airedale. That did not work when the neighbors got a dachshund. And then I had to figure out why a dachshund wasn't a cat. Well, she barks like a dog. Her nose is shaped like a dog, and she smells like a dog. See, I had to find features, other features that the dachshund had that matched dogs. Let's go to the next slide. My thinking uses specific examples to create concept. It's bottom-up thinking. Bottom-up thinking. Highly verbal thoughts, top-down. Big policy, how do we implement it? That's the problem. You need both kinds of minds working together. Let's go to the next slide. Bottom-up thinking. Animals do it, autistic people do it, and ChatGPT does it. Yeah, I just read the other day, ChatGPT was able to pass the bar exam, the lawyer bar exam, very high grades, but she's also very good at making up fake judgments on lawsuits of cases. I was just horrified. Totally fake. Yeah, that's not good. I had it look at some cattle handling stuff. It did a good thing with that. Then I asked it to write a short paragraph about purple flying zebras. And it did tell me they were a fictitious animal that eats clouds and rainbows. That's good. But this thing with the lawsuit cases, I just couldn't believe it. Fake lawsuit cases. And it was absolutely sure it was right, and they gave fake references for it. Let's go to the next slide. Flight zone. If you have a totally tame animal, you don't have any flight zone at all. There's no flight zone. Okay, these sheep have got some flight zone. Tame animals, you need to train it to lead. Now, you stand inside the flight zone where the animal can't get away, it might start rearing up and having a really bad time. Let's go to the next slide. You enter the flight zone, the animal moves away. Now, you see how that tan animal is looking at me? See, there's two zones. There's a flight zone where they're going to move away, but there's another zone where they'll turn and look at you. And on talks on low-stress handling, people call it different things. Awareness zone, pressure zone, cattle want to see you, zone of influence. So there's a flight zone where they're actually going to move away, and then there's the zone where they will turn and they will look at you. You can see the white animal is turning and looking. Let's go to the next slide. Now here's a handy way to get an animal to go forward in a single-file alley. Walk back by it in the opposite direction. You just walk back by it in the opposite direction. It works. Try it. It absolutely works. Let's go to the next slide. Now, since I was really weird, I was bullied and teased in high school, and the only place I had friends was through shared interests. Horses, for me, it was model rockets, horses, and electronics. So these kids that are different, Get them involved in something where there's a shared interest. Like there's a lot of people making honey and things like that. That could be an example of a shared interest, because that's where I get my friends. Like Brad, who sells books for me, we like to look at aviation stuff. And this morning we were laughing over the guy who bought Elvis Presley's abandoned plane with 24-karat gold-plated seatbelts. When I get on the flight tomorrow night, I'm going to think about seatbelt buckles in a different way. And he's going to make a motorhome out of it. And then he cut the tail off, and he's going to sell little bits and pieces of that for souvenirs. And we were laughing over that. That's the kind of stuff we like to laugh about. But when you're weird and when you're different, the way I sold my design services was showing a portfolio of my work. I learned to show my work rather than selling myself. The person who's going to be super good at building things might not interview really well. But you got to show that stuff, not to the human resources department, but to somebody who's going to care about those building, the things you build. Let's go to the next slide. That's the drawing I used to sell one of my biggest clients, Cargill. I sent it to the head of Cargill. 30-second wow. Single drawing, some photographs, a brochure. That's selling the work. And a lot of the people I worked with that were autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD had their own businesses. Well, often worked better with their own businesses. But then they had their wife, or they had somebody else that has to be the verbal mind to pay the bills. I know a guy who's got a corporate jet now. He started out with a single welding class. He's building beef plants all around the country. One welding class, horrible at algebra. He also has a guy who makes sure the customers pay the bills and do that part of the business. And as I got on that jet, I'm going, this is the jet that algebra did not pay for, right there. You know, so you can have a really good career even though you're really terrible at higher math. And what I found in these big plants is that the mechanically clever equipment all came from Europe. We paid the price for taking out shop classes 25 years ago. Because in a lot of parts of the country, the small shops are not forming. It's a really big problem. And then the degreed engineer with the mathematics does boilers and refrigeration. We don't understand that stuff. That's for mathematicians to do. And I saw this division of engineering labor in every large plant. It was true for all of them. Let's go to the next slide. That's one of the pictures that went in the portfolio. You might wonder why curved, because cattle have a tendency to go back to where they come from. We go to the next slide. Non-slip flooring, I can't emphasize how important that is. Now I'm going to see how good your observation is. How many of you saw that that animal was looking at the sunbeam? Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I want you to observe, because that sunbeam was probably there for just a couple of hours in the morning. And then in the afternoon, it's going to be gone. When I show this to kids, half the hands go up, because little kids are much more sensory-based in their thinking. And then language kind of overwrites it. And I discussed that in my visual thinking book. Let's go to the next slide. Now, people ask me all the time, what are some of the things I'm the most proud of and stuff I've done with livestock? I started out the first 20 of my years of my career, everything with facilities. In fact, I mistakenly thought that you could build self-managing facilities. Yeah, there's no such thing as self-managing facilities. You have to have the stockmanship to go with it. So I had a lot of equipment out in the field, and a lot of people tore it up and wrecked it. Then I was hired in 1999 by the McDonald's Corporation to implement their animal welfare audits. And when you had big companies inspecting it, what a difference that made. It really improved things. They had to have some standards. And the biggest thing that they had to improve was maintenance of equipment, moving small groups of cattle. It was simple stuff. A whole lot of simple things that added up to a big thing. We'll go to the next slide. So these are the things we measured. 5 really simple things that you measured. And this is now part of beef quality assurance. And you need simple things to measure, like falling down, for example. It can be due to rough handling, or it can be due to a really slippery floor. Electric prod use. If cattle are mooing, when you catch them in the squeeze chute, then you're probably hurting them. Or they're slipping on the floor, and that's just making them go berserk. You manage stuff that you measure. It's sort of like traffic rules out on the highway. The police didn't keep measuring the speed and measuring the drunken driving. Can you imagine what the highway is going to be like? Let's go to the next slide. So I did some baseline data back in 1996, and only 30% of the big beef plants could shoot dead on the first shot 95% of the cattle. Then when the audit started, look at how it jumped up. You know what the main problem was? Busted equipment. That's management. You see, you need both the facilities and you need the management. And when you have big customers auditing stuff, it makes a difference. Let's go to the next slide. This is the original data from my first graduate student. And I had a hypothesis, and this was discussed by the speaker this morning, that cattle that jump around in the squeeze chute, get real agitated, would have lower weight gains. It's true. This was radical stuff back in the mid-90s. You know, now everybody's been working on temperament selection of cattle. But be careful, don't overdo it. You know, you overdo anything, you might get into trouble. Maybe she won't take care of her calf. Let's go to the next slide. Don't over-select for temperament. Yeah, you don't want a dull head that doesn't have any activity. In fact, I've seen kind of a weird thing happen where this animal, this morning the speaker talked about exit speed testing with an electric eye. Well, this is an animal that's really tame. He has no flight zone. You can rub out his winter hair in the chute. But you ask him to go in the squeeze chute, he'll kick your head off. And then he'll blow snot on you on purpose. And then this is how he walks out of the squeeze chute, and then he goes, eh! Yeah, he flips the bird. I think it was anger. Yeah, I don't particularly want to call those snorters. I don't want one of those. That's not something that you want. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the Brahmin, if you're nice to them, they really like stroking. When you're working with animals, don't pat like this. Stroke it, stroke it, stroke it. I've seen at big fancy horse shows, people going like this on their horse. No, you're hitting your horse. You want to stroke the animal, don't hit it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, let's just look at some basic animal welfare things out on the farm. Handling scoring for cattle. Body condition. Damaged knee joints. That can be a problem on some dairy cattle in intensive housing. Dirty animals. Ammonia levels inside a building. Heat stress. Let me tell you, when cattle breathe with the mouth open, when they're resting, they are too hot, period. It's not like panting like a dog. And as the mouth opens and the tongue comes out, the internal temperature just goes right up. Now, the industry didn't like those results. They had to publish it in a weird journal called the Journal of Biometeorology. I didn't know there was such a thing. But it's one of the best papers on cattle heat stress. I was very pleased when I heard the speaker this morning talk about light-colored cattle. The downside of Angus is they get hot. This is something that people don't really want to acknowledge. I'll tell you a really, really good use for solar panels, shade and feed yards. Mount them 12 foot off the ground, orient the shade so that it's north and south and the shadow will move. Any shade should be 12 foot off the ground. Shades work better when they're about 12 foot off the ground, regardless of what they're made out of. Orient it north and south so the shadow can move. And I like to see sheep grazing under solar panels. But they got to be high enough so the sheep don't rub on the edge of the panels. They will break them. I was just out on the ranch. I got up really close and personal with a real fancy set of solar panels. I can tell you, those flimsy little frames, animals cannot be touching those. So it has to be mounted high enough where they cannot scrape on it. Also, you got to put some space between them so the grass will grow under them, and so you can walk in between them. No, solar panels make great shade. Parking lots, that's another place you ought to put them. But I'd like to see every feedlot in a lot of parts of the U.S. solar panel shades, because they complain about how expensive the shades are. Well, the solar panels will pay for the shades. And then when they finally stop working, you've paid for the shade. It's that simple. Let's go to the next slide. Now let's look at lameness. Lameness is a really big welfare issue. And this is just a list of all the possible things that can make cattle lame. See, this is the concept of a critical control point. What are the really important things to measure? You can't measure everything. It's up to the managers and the veterinarians to fix all these lameness problems. But lameness is a screening tool. I can measure lameness. And then is lameness getting better or getting worse in my herd? Lameness can be caused by conformation. When you just breed animals for big Mr. Meat, you tend to get more leg conformation issues. Some of these big, really muscular cattle now, they're getting congestive heart failure. And it's genetic. Let's go to the next slide. Leg conformation. 40 years ago, when pigs were just bred for lean meat, you got leg conformation issues. They'd either be too straight or they'd be walking on the dew claws. If the animal's dew claws go down and touch the floor, that is a genetic defect. Don't breed that. Let's go to the next slide. There's a steer with the legs so straight, if it was a bully, wouldn't last very long. We'll go to the next slide. There's a pig with an awful foot, and I have seen that in cattle too. Don't breed stuff like that. Let's go to the next slide. That's another genetic defect, corkscrew foot or twisted claw. We can go to the next slide. Now let's just look at genetics. Traits can be linked in genetics in really weird ways. And scientists still don't know why certain traits are linked. Well, years ago, the scientist Belyaev wanted to breed a fur fox that wouldn't tear your hand off. And then you see what it looks like here? So after 20 generations of selecting for fur fox to lick your hand rather than rip it off, I'll show you what you got on the next slide. Who would think that you'd change the body shape? You'd get black and white coloration. You turn the fox basically into a dog. All they did is select for temperament. Why is this linked? Still not known. Still not known. They did find out he had more serotonin in his brain, but then they kept selecting for gentle foxes, and they ended up with epilepsy. That's a defect. So don't take it too far. Yeah, and they also bred a strain of very nasty foxes. So there's behavior things that definitely have a genetic component. Let's go to the next slide. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could never get in a pen with farmed deer like this. Yeah, already started the process of domestication. Let's go to the next slide. Look at the bulldog. I got a bash on the bulldog. That's what it used to look like. All right, the next slide shows a real extreme bulldog. Can't breathe, can't have its babies naturally, has difficulty walking. Let me show you what the bulldog looked in 1938. And on the next slide, that's a 1938 version of a bulldog. So how did we get to what we have now? That is what I call bad becoming normal. Bad becoming normal. It happens slowly. There was problems with dairy cattle getting high rates of lameness. People don't see it. In fact, 3 studies showed that you'd ask a dairy producer, well, what's the percentage of lame cows? They'd underestimate by half. Underestimate by half. And that's pictures, Bulldog's Dilemma. You can find it online. Bulldog's Dilemma. That's what they used to look like. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there's a cute little pug that can actually breathe. The little tan pug can breathe. And the black one has trouble. He has a little tiny bit more nose. So I'm not saying you can't have a pug or a bulldog, but make it just a little less extreme. And then you're not going to have the problems. And this one did turn out to be an intact male, and I said, you ought to breed it. And they said, well, it doesn't have any papers. And I go, just DNA test it. It's a purebred pug. Let's go to the next slide. That's an extreme Arabian horse. Yeah, dish face is nice, but that looks like a seahorse. I don't think that's very nice. Go to the next slide. Now, looking at welfare, we got to prevent suffering. But that is not sufficient. You've got to do more than just prevent suffering. The other thing I'm getting very concerned about is a lot of people are bashing ruminant animals as wrecking the environment. Grazing animals can be used to improve the environment, but you got to use them right. The previous speaker said leave the half the grass behind. That's absolutely right. And the way you measure that is you have to make sure the roots are regenerated. The green stuff grows faster than the stuff underneath. Then I have a paper that you can find online. It's called Grazing cattle, sheep, and goats is an important part of a sustainable agricultural future. And the paper's free. You can get it online. Grazing cattle, sheep, and goats is an important part of a sustainable agricultural future. And I review all the studies on rotational grazing, also on grazing cover crops. And it's free. It's free. You won't hit a paywall when you look up that paper. Because we use them right. Activists will complain that cattle take up too much land. We have a 100-mile stretch of land in eastern Colorado that can only be grazed. You can't do anything else with the land. It is too arid. It's plains land. In fact, if you don't graze some of this land, like Flint Hills of Kansas, the Sand Hills of Nebraska, then you get woody brush that comes in there. Man, you're going to have fuel for forest fires like you've never seen it. And one thing that just blew my mind, and they just had these fires up in Alberta, Canada. We had smoke for about 4 days in Denver, Colorado. And normally when I drive to the airport at a certain time in the morning, I get blinded by the sun. I wasn't blinded by the sun. I didn't need a sun visor. The sun was a weird red thing. It was the smoke was blocking the light. That's just right recently. Let's go to the next slide. Does an animal have a life worth living? It's one of the things we have to ask. Actually, big broilers like to jump up on the little scale platform and swing on it. Let's go to the next slide. Well, of course, I got my books over there at the book stand and my new book on visual thinking. And what I want to do right now is we'll do some questions. And what I will have to do with the questions, hopefully they'll have a mic that they can take around in the audience. And we can put up there's a couple of other books to show off. Yeah, that's some of my textbooks. We got a few of those too, in my visual thinking book. So if nobody has a question, I'm going to pick somebody. That's what I'm going to do. See how we're doing on time here.
Hi.
Okay.
I have a child that has some visual things that scare her or auditory things that scare her. And for example, going to the park, she doesn't like to watch people swing. It's terrifying.
She doesn't like to watch people swinging. Well, that's a visual processing problem.
Okay. What would you suggest in terms of helping her to
Now, how old
adjust?
is she?
She's 3.
She's 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Because sometimes this kind of problem can cause a problem with reading. Okay. And the person, she's too young to be reading, but...
No, she reads.
She reads? Okay.
Yeah, full. She's probably got a 1st or 2nd grade reading level.
Well, the other thing is move her ahead.
Okay.
Don't let her do baby work.
Okay.
And you might have another kid who's super good at math. Move them ahead. That's really important. You see, for me, an algebra book's a doorstop. But for another math kid, it's a door to opportunity. You see, it's important to expose kids to lots of different things.
So with the swinging, would you suggest trying to keep
Well,
exposing
the other
her to
thing
that?
is she can have some control, so she doesn't like to watch people swinging.
Yeah.
Is there anything what about automatic doors at the supermarket?
Doesn't bother
That
her.
doesn't bother her.
No.
But it's the swinging.
Yeah, it's something about the sound
Oh, it's
and
the
also
sound.
watching.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if she's on the swing?
She used to get on it, but now she won't get on it.
But you see, if she
Maybe.
starts the noise,
Okay.
that often helps. You see, this element of control is really important. Another thing I see all the time, and I don't think's good, is wearing headphones all the time to block out sound. But the problem is, if you wear earphones all the time to block out sound, you will make sound sensitivity worse. It will make it worse. So what you want to do is have them with you all the time. That's control. And then try not to put them on. Except for some really terrible noisy stuff, like some of these I call industrial strength bathrooms, where all these hand dryers and flushers are going off all at once. Yeah, you can put it on for that, then take it off. But the control is the thing, the way to desensitize. There's also a paper you can get, and it's free online. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. And what you do is you stimulate 2 senses at the same time. It's real simple, like maybe hold a cold water glass and smell some cinnamon. And then you keep changing the pair of senses that you stimulate, just using simple things like that. One of the things you do is you nail a 2x4 to the floor, and then they've got to walk the tightrope on it, and then maybe smell aromatherapy. And then you're always changing the things that you stimulate. And I think what that does is desensitize some of this sensory stuff. And that's a simple thing to do. And I'm going to sit down right now for just a couple of seconds because my back's hurting me. Okay, we'll get the next question.
Well, this kind of goes in to what you were just saying, but I have just got my first family milk cow, and I grew up with beef cattle, but this is the first time I've had a dairy cow. And so that relationship has been very different. And I've
the dairy
it.
cow, see, the thing with the dairy cow, she voluntarily comes, there's a picture for the Homestead Festival of the dairy cow following the little girl because the little girl's probably going to milk her. Yeah, that's totally different than the beef cattle. And hopefully when you got your dairy cow, you were real gentle with her when you first got her. And has she started milking yet?
Yes, she is. And the thing that I'm curious about is how regimented should I be with her as far as milking? I know some people say you need to be out there at 7 a.m. every morning. She seems to be okay if I, go and, maybe the next day I don't make it until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But
that's not the best thing with a dairy cow. They usually do better. I try to keep the time pick a time and keep it within an hour of the time. Yeah, I don't think switching from 7 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon is a good thing to do. Okay. But on the other hand, it's better to have a time. Pick a time where it's easy for you to be pretty regular about it. I don't care whether it's in the morning or the night, but you really shouldn't be going from 7 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not a good thing to do. There's other things where you want to kind of train an animal to tolerate different people, different vehicles. It'd be a good idea that she is trained that other people can milk her, because some of the animals that freak out the most are the ones that live a sheltered life. Some beef cattle where they see one farmer, one vehicle, and then you take them to the auction market and they go berserk because they haven't seen enough things. So I want to train her that other people can milk her. That's okay. Strange cars and trucks are okay. Teach her to that. But the thing that really needs to be kept kind of constant is the milking time. I wouldn't be going such a long time between changing it that much.
Hi.
Okay?
I have been dying to ask you this question, and it's about horse slaughter and the differences. It's not legal anymore in America, but a lot of people sell their horses at sale barns, and they get shipped down to Mexico or Canada, and that it's been proven that only 1/5 of them are dead at the time of slaughter.
I'm having trouble hearing you. You may have to come up front.
Okay.
You're saying they were shipped down to Mexico?
Yeah, horses getting shipped down to Mexico for slaughter, but they slaughter them with a bovine bolt gun, and it's just horrific.
Well, the thing on the horse slaughter, the horse is more skittish than cattle. Now, we get into all kinds of politics on this I'd rather not get into, but I do have on my website some differences in the handling. First of all, they must not be able to see over the top of the stun box into the plant. And the walls have to be higher than for beef. The other thing is, in a small plant for beef, one person can load the animal, the cattle, into the stun box, and then stun it. The horse gets up too upset. You need to have one person loads the box, the door comes down, bang. Don't wait. And make sure it has a non-slip floor. Now, you can use a bolt gun satisfactorily. It's got to be maintained. But the two people thing, that's one of the things that's really different. One person brings it in, shuts the door, bang. Another person shoots it. And that's the same thing with bison. If anybody's working with bison, you don't line them up in single file the way you would with cattle. You do 2 at a time. Have the box completely empty. You bring 2 up the chute. One goes in the box, bang, roll it out. Next one comes in, bang, leave it in the box. And then when you've got the whole system cleared out, you bring the next 2 up. Do them in 2s like that. You try to line them up like cattle, they lay down, they do all kinds of bad things.
I have a son with apraxia of speech. He's 4.
How old is he?
He's 4.
He's 4.
He's getting ready to go to pre-K, and he goes to speech twice a week, but they're only going to be offering him speech once a week in school for pre-K.
That's not enough therapy for a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I watched a video where you talk about that, how do I express to get him into more speech therapy?
Well, the best thing to do, because you don't have time, you got 3-year-olds that are not talking, I want to get working with them. They need about 20 hours of therapy a week. And the thing is, use the professional teacher as a coach and get some students and some volunteers. You can't do this all yourself. You're going to get totally stressed out. The other thing is he making any progress?
Oh, yes.
He's making progress.
He's made
That's
dramatic
good.
progress. I mean, some days are good, and then some days
Well, that can
are
happen.
bad, but here in the past 6 months, he's made tremendous.
Good, he's making progress.
Tremendous progress.
But that really isn't enough therapy. You can't do it all yourself, but you're going to have to just put your own program together. I do have some books over there on the book table that I think will be helpful. But you don't want to fight for it and then he doesn't get the therapy.
Yeah.
Okay, now I just want to review. What do I want out of a little kid's autism program? Now I'm talking 2 to 5. I want to get more speech. The
Yes.
other thing about these kids, they're like a phone with 1 bar of service, like Brad's credit card machine. He's got a magic spot that if he sits there and he doesn't move, the credit cards will work. He moves, it don't work. So you're dealing with kind of a bad connection there. And these kids' brains are sort of like a phone with 1 bar of service. You got to give them time to respond. You get too much in their face like this, he's going to freeze. He's going to go into sensory overload.
Yeah.
So I want to work on speech. You want to encourage to use the words. You know he wants the juice, now use your words, encourage it. You might have to wait 20 seconds for him to respond.
Yeah.
It's like a really slow computer. The other thing is turn taking at games. Learning how to wait and take turns at games. I don't care about eye contact. That's not on my list.
Okay.
Taking turns at games. And then skills, dressing, hand washing, just basic skill things. That's what I want out of 3-year-olds. And they should like going to therapy. And what I have found is some teachers have the knack. They know just how much to push. And some teachers don't. And I think it's sort of like an innate behavior, almost like people that are good with animals.
Yeah, he also has a thing. He loves.
You got to have to use the mic.
Oh,
Okay.
He loves animals.
Well, then
I
do
mean-
things with animals.
Like horses, we're trying to get him into a camp where he can go and ride horses.
Well, that'd be good if you can get him into that. Or if there's a local farm around, he can go do things with animals. I mean, sometimes you just have to figure out what you can do in the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And I would get some special ed students or some grandmothers that are good with kids just to work with them. Take them out to the park and have them look at different plants, identify different grasses. I mean, just in my book on visual thinking, one teacher, they didn't have anything to do in the city, so they studied parking meter ticketing. And the kids thought that was really interesting. But okay, so even something the most boring thing like that, I saw a 4-year-old having the greatest time with the rain gutter on our animal science building. And the dad facilitated it, and there was a concrete trough that came off the roof, and then it went under a metal plate on the sidewalk. So Dad said, now take the leaves out of the ditch, and the water will come out the other end. So the kid pulls the leaves out, then he's running over to watch the water come out from under the metal plate. And the kid was having the greatest time. You're talking about a roof drain, and it's roof water, it's not dirty.
Yeah.
But something that's the most mundane thing, you've made into a really nice interactive activity. And what you want to do is just more of those kinds of things. And I hope you're controlling the electronics use.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I'm saying I don't want to see a kid 10 hours a day on a phone. That I don't want to see. That needs to be, I don't believe in a total ban, but it needs to be severely limited because they're not going anywhere. And if you've got an older autistic individual addicted to video games, I'll tell you how to get them off. Car mechanics. Because they're often the visual thinker, and they find out that the cars are more interesting than the video games. And they can get good jobs. ChatGPT's not going to fix cars anytime soon. She's good at making up fake lawsuits, but she's not very good at fixing cars.
Professor Grandin, I want to thank you for being an inspiration. I have a little girl right there in the straw hat I've homeschooled 4 kids. She was number 3. She was diagnosed with very severe verbal apraxia on the autism spectrum, and today she is in her sophomore year of college.
Good.
And you are one of her great inspirations, and we just appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And that makes doing these talks worthwhile. And I hope she's also had a job.
She does. She actually runs all the pet care services in our neighborhood. Everybody loves her.
Okay,
and
good.
Takes
good.
care of dogs and cats and raises her own, too.
Because I think it's very important that an autistic person learn how to do a task on a schedule outside the family. And I'd like that starting around 11 with maybe church volunteer jobs,
And
where
that.
it's on a schedule and somebody outside the family's the boss. Also, gradual transitions work. When I was a young kid, I sold candy for charity. That helped with social. In our neighborhood, when I was 7 or 8 years old, all the kids had to put on their best clothes and be little hosts and hostesses at parents' parties. And you were taught to shake hands. Because in the 50s, lots of times social skills were taught in a much more structured manner. And that was really a good thing. But that's just great. You know, we get them out doing things, okay?
Thank you. All right. First of all, I want to say thank you. I have boys that are 19 and 20. My youngest is autistic and has ADHD, and my 20-year-old is autistic and dyslexic. My youngest is in the president's program, honors in college. My older one's getting ready to start welding school. So as you're talking about getting them doing something, working with their hands, I'm just not.
Well, I can tell you about 3 people I worked with. A single welding class led to a big construction company and a corporate jet. Another single welding class led to a very well-known brand of cattle handling equipment that I can't disclose because he's not publicly disclosed. But he's autistic, dyslexic, flunked algebra, took a welding class, has 20 patents.
I wish my son was sitting here to hear
and if
that.
I told you what the thing was, it's a cattle handling equipment thing. We'll just leave it at that. But a very, very successful business. And it was that single welding class. You see, now I'm not saying that's for everybody.
Right.
And then another one invented all kinds of stuff for the beef industry, working on cars. He invented the rail switch, like in the beef cooler. Every big beef plant has his rail switches. The patents have now expired.
All that said, my question, I am a sensory processing therapist. Got into it basically to learn how to better get my boys to where they are. Not everybody has that at home. I have 2 pretty significant age groups. My littles that are between like 4 and 7, they're the easy ones. But I'm
Now,
getting-
your littles right now, they're just normal littles.
Oh no, everybody's neurospicy. Autistic, ADHD, in the diagnosis process, every single one of my
Now,
clients.
are the little kids talking?
Yes, all but 3 of my current client load. We've got them at least partially verbal. A couple have selected mutism.
Now, what are you doing with little kids? I mean, the other one was getting 1 hour of speech a week with it. That is not sufficient.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
I'm hearing that
20
all
hours
the time.
is a minimum. We're also doing in our office very, very extensive vision therapy because if you can get that connection with the eye and the brain working correctly, it goes miles. That said, my older kids, they're all verbal. Again, everybody has some sort of neurodivergence, but we're hitting a failure to launch wall. 'Cause
The
they're all
failure to
15,
launch,
16,
this gets
17,
back
18.
to the working. Like when I was in high school, I had a little sign painting business. You see, I want to encourage those kinds of things. And I made signs for our school with the school logo on it. Well, my first paid sign was for a hair salon. And I got $10 for it. This is in the early 60s. And I had to make a sign the hair salon would want.
Makes sense.
You see, that's a very important skill because I know a lot of autistic kids, they want to do all this anime stuff, but that's not what people want.
Nope, it's what they like.
Well, I
They're
put the
preaching
Brecht
to
lady on it.
themselves.
I didn't worry about copyright infringement. I didn't know about that. It had the Brecht lady on it. But I figured that was something that a hair salon would want. You see, that's a very important skill. The other big thing I'm seeing is kids aren't learning driving. All right.
Absolutely right.
I did 200 miles on dirt roads, going to and from my aunt's mailbox. Took 20 minutes to go up and back on a dirt road. You've got to get the driving and the operation of that vehicle into autopilot, into what's called motor memory, before you touch traffic. You need to go to a totally safe place for much, much, much longer. That's really important. And I started out in the middle of the horse pasture. I had to learn on 3 on the tree with a horrible clutch.
Makes sense.
Now, one thing I did know how to do is steer. And we've got a lot of kids growing up today that haven't steered anything. So I did not have to learn how to steer. I had done plenty of that on a bike and on, trikes and riding toys. But we've got to work on things like little selling candy for charity, of the party host and hostesses. This is stuff they can do. I think this is going to help on some of the failure to launch, because a slow transition is always better. So you're not all of a sudden just chucking them in the deep end of the pool. That's what you don't want to do. Okay. Okay, great. I'll be around all today.
Hi. Hello, Professor. My name is Kyle, and Kyle James, and I'm autistic. I have Asperger's syndrome, and I just really wanted to say, I really like your work, and you're one of my biggest heroes. But my question is, how did you get into animals, and why do you think animals are so much like autistic people?
Well, the way I got into animals, getting exposed to them. I was not exposed to cattle until I was a teenager. That started as a teenager. When I was young, I was all about kites. I've got a book on the bookstand called Calling All Minds. It's all my kids' little projects I did. I'd spent hours tinkering with kites and airplanes and things to get them to fly. But kids have to get exposed to things. So let's look at how any student gets into any kind of career. It starts with exposure, then mentoring. And I had some very good teachers. I had an excellent science teacher. There was a building contractor who helped me get my business started. I didn't have any idea how to make a corporation or an LLC. I didn't know how to do that. That's something where somebody has to help you with that.
Yeah.
You've got to get, I want to see kids getting out and trying a lot of stuff. I tell college students, volunteer to help professors with their research. Find out what you like. You also need to find out what you hate. Someone says, well, I tried working in the microbiology lab and I got bored with lab work. Okay, it's good you found that out. Somebody else is going to love it.
Yeah. I can see what you're saying. That makes sense. I also have, I like animals too, and my favorite
Well,
animal,
let's get a job doing something with animals.
My favorite animal is a zebra. I like it because it is I like its stripes, and it's just really cool. I like it.
Well, the thing is, what I think you need to be doing, you look old enough to be working, is find someplace where you can get a job with animals. Because the big problem I'm seeing with kids with labels is they're not getting the transferring into the work world. And educators aren't aware of the special ed people I've worked with that build stuff for me. They're all in their 60s and 70s now. And the problem is they're not getting replaced. And they're not getting replaced because the kid who should be building things now is playing video games in the basement. We can't find people to fix industrial equipment right now. That's going on right now. My book the visual thinking book talks about that problem. And we've got to, there's a tendency to get too babied. But things like, the other thing I'm seeing is kids don't see doors to opportunity. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I go up to the editor and I get their card. Because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. I remember when I got my first tiny little article published in the Arizona Farmer Ranchman magazine. You see, you start out small, but the sign painting business helped me get my cattle handling business started. Okay? And then I'll be over at the book table, and maybe it's time to wrap it up. Okay, let's get your question, and then I'll be around all afternoon and answer questions privately. Okay, what's your question?
Thank you. Sorry, my question is, I know you've explained some about people with autism who have delayed abilities to speak, but what about somebody who is able to speak and is selectively mute for years? Can you shed some light on that?
Oh, selective mutism, I think a lot of that is fear. Okay. It is fear. You know, I've been in a lot of experimental brain scan stuff that unfortunately is not commercially available. But I found out, even though the hospital has the scanner, but nobody knows how to read it. That's the problem. This is where there was a big divide between the scientists playing with fancy equipment. Better believe it, I've played with it. I'll tell you where I draw the line. If they want to change something in my brain, you can look, you can't mess with it. I won't do anything where you can mess with it. But fancy new scanners come out. I talked my way into getting that scientist playing around with equipment. The scanner's sitting there in the hospital, but nobody knows how to read it. That's the problem. But a lot of the selective mutism is fear. Is this
individual getting out and doing things? It's not an issue anymore. asking because of my little brother. I think he is autistic, but was never diagnosed on purpose by my parents because they were afraid of the stigma attached and the babying and stuff like that. He was selectively mute. He could talk the entire time, but he wouldn't speak to anyone outside of our immediate family for probably about 7 to 10
Okay,
years.
so then he's fine now.
He is.
Okay,
I'm just
good,
trying
good.
to understand it because I work in behavioral health and I've seen it in other people as well.
Well, and I've seen that. And I think a big problem is not getting out and doing enough things. So what Mother used to do with me, well, we could go to Woolworths or we could go to First National. Those were 1950s stores. Now it's Target or Walmart. But basically, yeah, we're going to go shopping, and we'll give you a pick of 2 stores, dollar store or the grocery store, something like that, where there'd be a limited choice. But we were going to go out, and we're going to do something. The thing you cannot let these kids do is just become a recluse in their room. And then, then the question comes up about allowing stimming. I was allowed to do stimming for an hour after lunch. That was allowed. And then I had to, join the table, and we had family meals where we took turns talking. You see, I think that's an important part of therapy, taking turns talking at meals. See, and teaching the turn taking at games is important. And sometimes you don't always win. Some of these kids are really bad on sportsmanship. So these things have to be taught. And we've got to control the electronics. They're not having good results. But there's 5 or 6 cases now where car mechanics successfully got kids off of video games. And there's a program in Denver called TACT. And they're teaching autistic kids to fix cars. And the car dealers are snapping them up. They have contract now with car dealers. Really, really happy about that. And they find out that cars are much more interesting than video games. Okay, want to do some more questions? Or?
Do we have any more questions?
Okay, let's do a few more questions here where everybody can hear, because I can be heard.
Tell them where your booth is.
My booth is right back there.
And you'll be there this afternoon, is
I'll
that
be
correct?
there this afternoon. I'll be going there it's just right back there.
I think it's as you exit, it's the one
As
on the
you
right.
exit, it's
You'll
right
see her
there.
book table right there.
Okay.
I had a question about dog training. So since we are verbal and animals tend not to be, and you see so much dog training being
Dogs
verbal.
can learn words that they associate with commands. They can learn that.
Right, because it's like a sound. But I've found sometimes people pronounce words differently or say them in different
That's a problem for the
tones.
dog. That's
Right.
a problem for the dog. And it's also important on commands is to have, sit and stay. That sounds really different. Sit and stay.
Right.
And commands like that someone's going to be less likely to say differently, because a dog is going to have problems if somebody says it really differently.
What are your thoughts then on like whistle training or clickers as opposed to sounds or using like hand signals or commands?
Well, you can use a lot of different things. I'm not going to get into a fight over that. Okay. But the one thing I will say is that whatever you use, especially things like sit and stay that are opposites, whatever you use needs to be very different. The dog isn't going to mix it up.
Okay, thank you.
That's the important thing.
Hi, I'm an occupational therapy practitioner, and I just wanted to ask, how would I encourage parents or make parents more confident in allowing their kids to explore different sensory or like climb on objects or learn to use
I don't know. I
scissors?
tell them I'm not that nice about it. I talked to somebody this morning over at the book table, and I'm going to give you the job trailer version without the swear words. And we got to get these kids out doing things. I think a lot of parents don't believe their kid can do anything. And there's been several really, really, really good programs where in Kearney, Nebraska, they get kids out on boats. There's a surfing program in California. There's a program called, I can't remember the name of it, in Texas. And they get them out in the woods in cabins with no internet, out doing things. And one of these things that these programs teach the parents is their kid actually could do something like go on a boat and actually like it. Or maybe even go on a zip line, but we're not going to force that. But the going on the boat, yeah, we're going to want them doing that. And these were real gentle little boats on a pond. But a lot of parents get too much into the label, and they don't think that their kid can do anything. This is a really big problem. No, and the problem is I know therapists have to worry about getting in trouble with HIPAA and everything else. I just tell it like it is. You got to get the kid off his duff, get him off the video games, give some choices. Okay, let's say we're going to go shopping, Target or Walmart. Okay, you're giving a choice or whatever, We'll go to this booth or that booth. Limited choices. You see, that gets back to having some control over things.
So this is a question about animal behavior, specifically with a dog that takes commands pretty well, Border Collie. I've got a Border Collie, and the dog is very good at taking commands, but she tends to have a shy behavior and is not as aggressive as I would want her to be. Is there anything that you could suggest that...
In other words, she doesn't go after the sheep as much as you'd want her to?
She does, but as soon as she gets up to the sheep and an animal challenges her, she kind of backs down.
She gets scared. You see, this may be just a difference in personality. We're actually allowed to use the word personality in animal behavior before, or shy or bold. You see, there's genetic differences. And just like, I put that box in that pen of cattle, that I showed, that red cattle. They'd never seen a box in their pen before. Well, 2 steers came right up to it, but there's 2 others hanging back. And they've all been in the same environment. So it's not environmental. That's the difference in the animal right there. 2 of them were on that box instantly, sniffing it, and the other cattle stood back. And the dog might be just not maybe the right personality. There's a point where you can encourage her, but see, both environment and genetics affects animal behavior.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you for your contributions and coming to speak and do everything that you do, because your specific perspective on what you talk about is more influential to humanity in general right now, especially given the amount of people who are born nowadays with the specific conditions that you seem to have a better understanding than anybody else with.
Well, thank you. And the thing is I think most of the autistic people have always been here. I think it's increased detection, because I think about people I worked in construction with that definitely were, had a learning problem, they were dyslexic. And the bad thing that's going on, now some schools are putting the shop classes back in, then they won't let the special ed kids take shop. And I'm going, well, that's ridiculous, because the special ed kids I worked with own the shops. I'm serious.
Cheers to us.
Yeah, I worked with them, all through the 80s and the early 90s. I was out, this is before they had nice hotels like the Fairfield. You had those little strip hotels. I stayed in those not very nice little hotels. And I was out there in these big factories, out in the shops, and I can tell you, the kids that are different were building the stuff. And why are we getting fancy chicken processing equipment from Europe? Because in Europe, at 9th grade, you can go tech or you can go university. And the problem here, we're sticking our nose up at tech. We also don't make the state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine, even though the physics and the math was invented here. The machine comes from Holland. It goes back to the educational system.
Would you describe or would you say that it's more that our system seems to cater to the bottom 10% instead of actually offering advanced opportunities for the top 10%?
Well, there's some stupid things in education where they say, well, that kid's in 5th grade, he can't read high school books. I'm going, nonsense. If the kid is really good at math, I want to move him ahead. If the 3rd grader can do high school math, I'm going to have him do high school math. I might have to do special ed for reading. And by the way, I did not read when I was 8 years old, and Mother taught me with phonics. Out loud, old-fashioned phonics. That's how she taught me. And I've got a book over there called The Way I See It that explains all of this. You might find helpful. I have a little small book that's mainly for parents of new little kids and trying to decide what therapy to go into. But the people that are different, and then I've talked about, Michelangelo was probably on the spectrum. He was a grubby little 12-year-old that dropped out of school, playing around where they were commissioning great art. Grew up with stone cutting tools, and then he was mentored and apprenticed into a shop. You know, a lot of great inventors are probably on the spectrum.
Given your experience with the modern technology and who you've had the opportunity to communicate with so much, is there anything correlation-wise that you can think might be causing the lack of abilities that
lack of what?
Lack of abilities that more people have in today's society?
Well, I think part of the problem is, like if I had in that shop class in art and sewing class, my favorite thing when I was in 4th grade was a toy sewing machine that actually sewed, and I made costumes for the school play. I think there's a combination of social skills are not taught in the structured way they were taught in the 50s. Kids aren't getting out and doing enough different things and getting addicted to electronics. And I think because I think of all the people I worked with, what would have happened to the guy with 20 patents and a very successful equipment that's still being sold right now, very successful, today, if he was a 5-year-old today? What would happen to him? See, I think most of the autism's always been here. But there's less places, if you take out the hands-on classes, there's less places for these kids that think differently to show their skills off. That's the problem. And then you'll be interested in my visual thinking book. Yeah. And I'm going to be over there just a minute, and I'll sign one for you. Yeah, think we need to wrap it up?
Yeah, it's...
All right, okay.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and I'll be over at the book table.
And Temple, you're here tomorrow at 10:30 again with Joel Salatin, I believe, for a question and answer.